Welcome to the Fatter Wallet Show, because stewardship isn't about being broke. On this show, we read the books, break down the ideas, and articulate the best thinking on money, investing, entrepreneurship, productivity, financial strategy, and wealth creation. Every discussion is designed to help you stop guessing, start growing, and build a life of freedom, purpose, and stewardship. And if you're tired of feeling stuck financially, this is exactly where you need to be, because at Fatter Wallets, we don't just talk about money, we teach you how to master it. Before we jump in, I want to invite you to grab the free courses available at fatterwallets.com. They are completely free. Inside, you'll discover courses like, ooh, how to pay off your mortgage in 3 to 7 years using the velocity banking strategy. This method shows you step by step how to restructure your debt, use cash flow as a weapon, and eliminate loans in record time without earning more money and without working extra hours. Also learn how to turn the stocks you already own into weekly income using covered calls. You'll discover how to rent out your shares, generate consistent premium income, and dramatically increase your ROI with our beginner-friendly options trading course. All of this is 100% free because we believe financial wisdom should empower people, not lock them behind a paywall. So if you're ready to think bigger, live wiser, and grow a fatter wallet God's way, you're in the right place. All right, let's get into today's discussion. We are looking at the foundational knowledge contained within the pages of Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell.
Today, our mission is to really conduct a comprehensive analysis of the bedrock principles of economics.
Okay.
We're not getting bogged down in current political squabbles or, fleeting trends.
Not the noise of the day-to-day.
Exactly. We are here to extract fundamental knowledge that applies universally, principles that have held true across thousands of years of recorded history, whether you are examining a capitalist system, a socialist one,
A feudal one?
or anything in between. The overarching goal is to equip you, the listener, with crucial context. We want to clarify why various policies, often put forth with the absolute best of intentions, frequently lead to, disastrous and counterproductive outcomes. When you understand the underlying economic gravity, you stop reacting emotionally to events and start building a financial strategy based on sound reality.
Let's unpack this then. If we were to strip away all the complicated math, the dense academic journals and all the policy arguments, what is the absolute non-negotiable starting point of all economic thought?
The starting point, and really the entire reason the field of economics even exists, is a single concept.
Scarcity.
Scarcity. And when we discuss scarcity, we mean something really simple but profound. What everybody wants, what everyone collectively desires and tries to acquire, adds up to significantly more than there is available.
More wants than stuff.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
And this reality is persistent. It doesn't matter how technologically advanced a society becomes. The moment you satisfy one set of needs, new desires just emerge.
Okay, so this is where I think people get tripped up. Because we see journalists, for instance, focusing on the economic woes of the middle class in, say, America.
Right. You see that all the time.
And you think, wait a minute, statistically, this is one of the most prosperous groups in all of human history. They have homes, maybe a swimming pool, access to medicine.
That kings couldn't have dreamed of a few centuries ago.
Exactly. And yet they still worry about bills. They feel economically strained. So is that not really scarcity?
No, that's the perfect illustration of scarcity. It's not evidence that scarcity has been defeated. It's evidence that scarcity is pervasive. It simply changes the nature of the trade-off.
I see.
You move from struggling for basic survival to managing consumption, complexity, and, debt at a much higher standard of living.
That's such a crucial reframing. So scarcity isn't just about poverty. It's about limits relative to whatever our desires are at the time.
Precisely. It requires constant productive effort and personal responsibility to manage your income and consumption, no matter what your wealth level is.
So for you listening, the key takeaway is what?
It's realizing that scarcity is everywhere. That recognition stops you from chasing these limitless or, utopian solutions, which are economically impossible. It forces your focus onto optimization, efficiency, and wise stewardship of what you actually have.
That's fascinating because so many people fundamentally believe the purpose of economics or economic management is to solve problems, to create a perfect system where everyone has everything they need.
Right, a world of solutions.
But what this suggests is that economics is something much more humbling than that. It's about recognizing inherent limits.
That is the core insight. Economics is not about finding magical solutions that make costs disappear. It is fundamentally about revealing trade-offs.
Okay.
In a world where every single scarce resource has alternative uses. If we use a tree to build a house,
You can't use it for a boat?
you cannot also use that same tree to build a boat or burn it for fuel. It's one or the other. And this realization immediately exposes what we can call the unmet needs fallacy.
The unmet needs fallacy. Okay, break that down.
You constantly hear political rhetoric focused on needs, right? The need for more affordable housing, the need for universal health care, the need for better infrastructure.
All the time. These are presented as moral imperatives.
And the needs are real. No one is denying that. But merely demonstrating a need is never sufficient to justify meeting it.
Why not?
Because meeting that need requires diverting scarce resources, labor, capital, materials, from other valued uses. If we build more affordable housing, those resources are necessarily diverted from medical research or from education or even from productive private investments that could create jobs.
So politicians who focus only on the benefit of meeting that one need are essentially, they're ignoring the cost of the trade-off. It's like they're just robbing Peter to pay Paul.
It can be worse than zero sum sometimes because the shift itself introduces inefficiency. The underlying economic problem is always resource allocation under constraints.
Always.
So if the public debate only considers the benefit gained by Paul without acknowledging the opportunity cost imposed on Peter and everyone else, you're basically flying blind. You're making decisions with half the information.
Let's make that more concrete. The city parking spaces analogy is a good one. If a government decides to spend money to make parking seem cheaper, maybe they build subsidized public garages or something. How is that cost just disguised?
Okay, so it's disguised because it's shifted from a private transaction into a public expenditure.
Right.
But it doesn't just disappear.
Right.
If the government uses taxpayer money to subsidize a new parking garage, that money is diverted from other public goods, maybe improving the local school system or reducing property taxes.
That's the visible cost.
That's the visible direct cost of the subsidy. But the real, the insidious cost, the one that usually gets ignored, is the opportunity cost of the land itself.
Okay.
If a huge, centrally located lot is dedicated to a subsidized parking garage, that land cannot be used for high-density housing, for commercial office space, or a park.
All things that also have value.
Immense value. The true cost is the value of all those foregone opportunities. And the cumulative cost of that lost opportunity and reduced efficiency may far, far outweigh the money saved by a driver who pays $5 instead of $10 for a space.
That distinction between the visible monetary cost and the invisible opportunity cost, that feels absolutely critical for financial mastery.
It is.
Now, let's move to individual value judgment. We deal with value constantly, but often in categorical terms. Healthcare is categorically important, or saving lives is the highest priority. Why do incremental trade-offs, what's called the margin, beat those categorical priorities?
They beat them because value isn't absolute. It's highly subjective, and it changes dramatically based on how much of that thing you already have.
The more you have, the less you value the next one.
Exactly. It's the principle of diminishing returns. Categorical judgments completely ignore this. Something fundamentally beneficial, like food or water or even safety, can quickly become detrimental beyond a certain point.
Water is a great example.
It is essential for life, categorically important, right? But drink too much, and you can get sick. And excessive water in the form of a flood is devastating.
Right.
Or safety. It's
Yeah.
paramount.
Yeah.
If you spend 100% of your time and resources maximizing safety, you never leave your bed, and you sacrifice all productivity and enjoyment.
So it's always a trade-off at the margin.
Always. The principle of the margin focuses on the next unit of a resource. It's what coordinates resource flow efficiently. Take the milk example. We don't say milk must be used for the highest possible value, which is drinking.
No, because we'd have no cheese or ice cream.
Exactly. We ask, what is the next incremental use of this milk? Suppose a dairy has 1,000 gallons. The first few hundred go to drinking milk. The next few hundred might be used for cheese because cheese lasts longer and has a high value.
Okay.
Only when the incremental value derived from making another block of cheese starts to decline will the dairy operator decide to use the next gallon for something slightly less valued, like ice cream or butter.
So this is happening everywhere all at once.
Millions of times a day across every commodity. It's coordinating resource use based on constantly changing relative values across the entire economy, ensuring that no resource is wasted on a low-value use while a high-value use remains unmet.
Okay, so if the economy consists of millions of people making these tiny incremental trade-offs based on subjective changing values, How does the system possibly aggregate all that private, localized information without some central bureaucracy collecting it all?
This is where the price mechanism becomes the indispensable genius of the market. Prices are not just numbers.
Their information.
They are essential messengers conveying highly summarized information about the underlying reality. They reflect the millions of incremental decisions being made.
So they convey bad news and good news.
They do both.
Yeah.
Let's take the bad news first. Think of that beachfront property example.
Yeah.
High prices for a house on the sand are not the cause of the shortage.
Right.
They are the messenger conveying the pre-existing non-negotiable reality that there are far fewer beachfront houses available than the number of people who want one.
The scarcity was already there.
The scarcity is inherent. It's physics and geography. And it would exist under a socialist regime, a feudal monarchy, or a free market. High prices simply ensure that the scarce housing goes to those willing to make the greatest trade-off to acquire it.
And declaring it a basic right wouldn't create more beachfront.
Not one square inch. It would only necessitate a different, less efficient, and usually corrupt form of rationing.
Okay, so how do they convey good news?
They signal abundance and efficiency. Look at the exponential drop in the price and the incredible rise in the quality of computing power over the last few decades.
It's unbelievable.
The rapidly falling price of computers and smartphones immediately signals to every business and consumer worldwide that this resource is now abundant and highly efficient.
So a small business owner doesn't need to read some government report on silicon yields.
No. He just sees that prices have fallen and performance has improved, and he adjusts his purchasing decisions accordingly. This automatic global adjustment to new technology happens faster and more effectively than any central command could ever achieve.
That makes perfect sense. But when we talk about profits, things almost always get contentious, especially in public discussion. Why are profits and losses equally important? And how do they ultimately benefit me, the consumer, instead of just enriching the company owner?
Well, profits and losses are like the dual lifeblood of efficient resource allocation. Profits are the incentive, the reward, the magnet that draws scarce resources toward their most valued, most productive uses.
So if consumers want more of something,
They signal that with high prices and greater revenue potential, which translates into profits, which then attracts capital investment.
and the losses.
Losses are the other side of that coin. They're the signal, the sharp, painful stick that forces resources away from less efficient or less valued uses. If a business consistently operates at a loss, it is a signal to society that the resources being used could generate more value somewhere else.
So losses are just as important.
Equally important, without the threat of failure and the punishment of loss, the motivation to economize, to innovate, and to find the lowest cost way of producing goods just completely disappears.
I understand the mechanism, but let's see how that competition plays out over time. The history of the A&P grocery chain is a fantastic example of this. How does their rise and fall show this dynamic benefiting the consumer?
A&P was a titan. In the first half of the 20th century, they were massive, largely because they invented efficiency in grocery distribution.
They were the innovator.
Yes, they cut costs dramatically, charged lower prices than their local competitors, attracted a huge customer base, and earned massive profits. This was competition working for the consumer, driving down prices and raising living standards.
But then what happened?
The nature of competition is dynamic. Later on, rivals introduced the new, more efficient supermarket model.
Right. One-stop shopping, self-service aisles, big parking lots.
All of it. The supermarket changed the economics of distribution by achieving greater economies of scale and labor efficiency than A&P's older neighborhood store model. A&P failed to adapt quickly enough, and despite its history, it declined.
So the market forced those resources.
Exactly. The resources locked up in its old, less efficient stores were eventually forced out and redirected by the market to the newer, better supermarket model. The consumer wins. The economy continually finds the lowest cost, most convenient producer, even if it means destroying established giants.
That dynamic nature is so powerful. And when we look at business finances, especially in retail, the actual profit margin on a single item can look tiny, a penny on the dollar, right?
Yeah.
How do those small margins result in massive annual returns?
This is a critical concept for any entrepreneur or investor to grasp: the velocity of money, the turnover rate.
Velocity.
A high-volume retailer like a supermarket might clear only a 1 or 2% profit margin on $1 of sales. You buy a dollar's worth of eggs, they might make 1 cent.
Which sounds like nothing.
It does. However, that inventory, The eggs, the milk, the bread turns over extremely rapidly, maybe 50 or even 100 times a year. As soon as the supermarket sells the eggs, they recover their initial investment plus that 1 cent profit, and they can immediately use that capital to buy the next carton of eggs.
Yeah.
Because the same initial dollar of investment turns over so rapidly and earns a profit each time.
It compounds.
It compounds incredibly quickly. That high velocity produces a very substantial total annual profit rate on the initial capital investment. It's the economic engine of many modern retail empires.
So if the market relies on this, this brutal efficiency and dynamic competition to benefit the consumer, why do we constantly see calls for government intervention to protect specific struggling companies? Is protecting a competitor the same as protecting competition?
Absolutely not. And that confusion is the root of so much counterproductive policy.
Okay.
The most important thing is the competitive condition, the process. That's what guarantees efficiency and innovation. Protecting specific competitors is often nothing more than subsidizing inefficiency.
Which means forcing society to use more scarce resources than necessary.
Exactly. If a domestic car manufacturer is struggling because a foreign rival found a fundamentally cheaper, better, or safer way to build cars, protecting that domestic manufacturer with tariffs or bailouts just means penalizing consumers and taxpayers so that the less efficient process can continue.
And we've seen this in famous antitrust cases, right?
Yeah.
Where the government steps in.
We have. And many of those famous cases illustrate this confusion clearly. These governmental actions often targeted businesses, like the old Kodak company or the early efficient railroads. They were actually charging lower prices than their competitors.
Wait, they were charging lower prices?
Yes, they were being punished for their success in making things cheap, which suggests the intervention was less about protecting the competitive process, which requires low prices and disruption, and more about protecting their specific inefficient business rivals.
This brings us to a crucial realization. We have to distinguish between good intentions and systemic causation. When we look at economic problems, we need to understand how these reciprocal interactions often produce results that, no one willed.
That is the pivotal step toward economic literacy. It is always easier and emotionally more satisfying to adopt an intentional explanation.
Like blaming high gas prices on greedy oil companies.
Exactly. That's much easier than engaging in a complex, systemic analysis of changes in global supply chains, international conflicts, or shifts in consumer demand, which are the true root causes. This intentional blame often obscures reality and makes it impossible to find effective strategies.
Okay, so take the example of higher prices in low-income neighborhoods. The immediate reaction is to call it exploitation.
Right. But the painful truth is often systemic. It simply costs more to deliver goods and services there.
How so?
Retailers, banks, and service providers face demonstrably higher costs for insurance, security, and vandalism. These costs are real, they're on the balance sheet, and they must be recovered through higher prices or fees.
You also mentioned transaction costs. I think that's an element people really overlook.
It's huge. Think about banking or financial services. Lending $5,000 to one middle-class customer involves processing one loan application, one credit check, and managing one account. That process has a fixed cost.
Okay.
Now imagine a microlender who has to lend $100 each to 50 low-income borrowers to reach that same $5,000 total.
Oh, wow. That's 50 applications, 50 credit checks.
50 accounts to manage. The transaction processing cost per dollar of business is far, far higher. Even though the total amount of money loaned is the same, those higher costs have to be recovered.
And so if we try to solve that systemic problem by just imposing price limits, what happens?
Trying to fix that by opposing price controls, like a ceiling on interest rates or a cap on prices, only guarantees that even less will be supplied to people in those neighborhoods.
It makes the problem worse.
Much worse. The price controls reduce the willingness of competitive stores or finance companies to operate where costs are high. The ultimate effect is that the policy was intended to help suddenly have fewer services and less access to capital.
Let's look at the specific, disastrous track record of price controls, starting with the classic example, rent control. The price ceiling.
Rent control is perhaps the most universally studied policy failure in economics. It shows identical destructive consequences across vastly different cities. Cairo, Bombay, New York, Stockholm, you name it.
And what happens?
The moment you cap the price of rental housing below the market rate, you immediately reduce two critical things: the supply of new construction and the maintenance of existing units.
Right. Why would a landlord put on a new roof if they can't recover the cost?
They won't. They stop maintenance, they divert investment funds elsewhere, Or they convert rental units to condominiums. The result is housing quality declines, and the average age of the housing stock increases.
And the people it was supposed to help.
That's the deepest irony. Rent control creates severe shortages for newcomers, immigrants, and the truly needy, because the existing tenants who hold the cheaply rented apartments, who are often affluent, established residents, they never move.
So you get wealthy people in luxury apartments paying way below market rates.
Studies show it all the time. The biggest difference between controlled and free market prices is often in luxury apartments on prestigious avenues. Meanwhile, the poor struggle to find any vacancy, forcing them into cramped, often illegal sublet situations. The market just freezes up.
Okay, now let's look at the other side of that coin. Price supports, or price floors, which artificially hold prices up.
Price floors create chronic surpluses, the exact mirror image of the shortages caused by price ceilings. A classic example is agricultural price supports.
Right, where the government sets a minimum price for crops.
Exactly, and it's often above what the market price would be. This incentivizes farmers to overproduce because they know the government is a guaranteed buyer for any surplus.
The waste from that must be staggering.
It is. In the past, the U.S. government sometimes bought and stored more than a quarter of all the wheat grown in the country just to take it off the market and keep that price high.
And the cost is twofold, right?
Dual, yes. Consumers pay inflated food prices at the grocery store, and taxpayers foot the bill for the government to buy, store, and maintain these massive, sometimes decaying surpluses. You get literal mountains of wheat or butter or cheese.
And this waste doesn't just hurt people at home, it impacts the global system.
Precisely. When those mountains of surplus food are eventually sold off or, dumped on the world market below cost, they drive down prices for subsistence farmers in developing nations.
So a policy designed to help American farmers ends up hurting poor farmers in Africa or Asia.
Yes. It undermines their ability to rise out of poverty through the market because they can't compete with subsidized food.
This issue of price flexibility becomes so critical during emergencies. The public often calls for strict intervention to prevent so-called price gouging during a hurricane or an earthquake. Why is allowing prices to rise dramatically despite the moral outrage actually the most efficient way to handle a crisis?
Okay, so during a disaster, the supply of essentials generators, bottled water, gasoline is either fixed or has fallen, while demand just spikes.
Scarcity becomes acute.
Extremely acute, and those goods must be rationed one way or another. If the government imposes price controls and keeps the price of a flashlight at $5, two things happen. First, rationing happens by who gets in line first, which is slow and often unfair. Second, it encourages hoarding.
I might buy 5 just in case.
Of course. A family might buy 5 flashlights if they're cheap, leaving none for their neighbor. However, if the price of that flashlight skyrockets to $50,
I'm only buying 1.
you're strongly incentivized to buy just 1, maybe 2, and make do. The high price achieves efficient self-rationing. It ensures the scarce supplies are distributed based on intensity of need, measured by willingness to pay.
Okay, I get the rationing part. But it still sounds morally repugnant. It feels like exploiting the poor during a crisis.
That's the friction point. But we have to look at the total system result. High prices do a second critical thing. They mobilize supply. When meteorologists predict a hurricane, spiking prices for water and plywood immediately signal a massive profit opportunity to suppliers outside the affected zone.
So a guy with a truck in the next day sees a chance to make a lot of money.
Exactly. Truckers and businesses from unaffected states, seeing the 500% markup, rush water, gasoline, and batteries into the disaster area, often within hours. This voluntary, profit-driven mobilization restores the supply chain far faster than any government agency could ever manage alone.
And if you cap the prices,
You remove the very incentive that mobilizes those life-saving resources, and you end up prolonging the suffering.
when you look at the track record of centrally managed economies versus market economies, the historical evidence is just devastatingly stark. What did central planners fundamentally fail to grasp?
Their fundamental failure was what's called the knowledge problem. The task of coordinating millions of tiny resource decisions, how much red paint versus green paint, how much copper wire versus aluminum, it proved impossibly complex for any central committee.
The knowledge is just too dispersed.
It's inherently dispersed throughout the economy, not concentrated at the top. In the Soviet Union, this resulted in profound institutionalized waste because enterprises were not forced to economize. Without prices accurately reflecting scarcity, factory managers had no incentive to save materials.
So they are just incredibly inefficient.
Unbelievably so. Soviet industry required 2 to 3 times more resources, like copper and energy, to produce the same physical output as comparable market economies.
Give another one of those bureaucratic anecdotes to really illustrate that paralysis.
Okay, think about the rigid planning system. Factories were given quotas based on weight. So they started producing comically heavy, inefficient goods nails so thick they were unusable, or mining equipment so heavy it couldn't be transported.
That's insane.
Or the story of the factory manager who couldn't ship vital mining equipment simply because he had green, oil-resistant paint available, but the bureaucratic order prescribed red, oil-resistant paint.
And he wouldn't ship it.
He refused to ship. He feared 8 years in prison for disobeying a specific instruction, even though the delay potentially shut down a mine. That rigid paralysis, driven by fear and the lack of real-time price signals, cost the Soviet people their standard of living.
And then we've seen these incredible transformations when countries shift away from that centralized model.
The change in countries like China and India is the definitive real-world experiment. For decades, they were among the poorest nations on Earth, crippled by central control. When they began reducing market restrictions in the late 20th century, the growth was explosive.
What happened in China specifically?
Agricultural liberalization was key. By 1990, 80% of agricultural output was sold directly in the market, up from less than 10% in 1978.
And the result?
Instantaneous. Farmers' incomes rose by more than 50% in just a few years, and food supplies dramatically increased. Hundreds of millions of people rose out of destitution because prices could now attract food and capital where they were most needed. It proved that the wealth was constrained by poor policy, not by a lack of resources.
Okay, so for you, the listener, building wealth means making smart investments, not just in stocks and real estate, but crucially, in yourself. What exactly is human capital, and how does investing in it lead to financial mastery?
Human capital is the accumulated knowledge, skills, and experience that a person has. It's an investment because it requires a sacrifice of time and effort today.
Like going to school instead of working.
Exactly. You forego immediate income by attending school, taking a low-paying apprenticeship, or spending years learning a complex trade all for the expectation of greater future productivity and higher returns over your lifetime.
And it's not just formal schooling.
That's what's vital to understand. The Industrial Revolution, which created unprecedented wealth, was driven heavily by practical human capital. The airplane was invented by the Wright brothers, a pair of bicycle mechanics who never went to college.
And Edison only had 3 months of formal schooling.
Right. These individuals possessed immensely valuable knowledge acquired through hands-on experience and rigorous experimentation. Their knowledge was economically decisive. Proving that skill, derived from any form of investment, dictates value.
Let's discuss labor markets and wages. We see huge disparities in pay. Is this evidence of exploitation, or is there a more fundamental mechanism determining what someone is worth?
Wages are primarily determined by productivity, the value of the output produced by the worker. A company operating in a highly competitive market has to pay a worker a wage roughly equal to the value that worker adds.
What about discrimination?
Discrimination is real, and it imposes heavy cost on those being discriminated against. But it's also costly to the employer in a competitive market.
How so?
An employer who refuses to hire highly qualified, productive people from a specific group risks leaving jobs unfilled, paying higher overtime, or being forced to hire less productive people. This raises their operational costs and makes them less competitive than rivals who hire purely based on productivity. The market itself imposes a penalty on prejudice.
So when we see policies intended to help the lowest wage workers, like minimum wage laws, how does the economic framework analyze their impact?
Well, these policies, while having benevolent intentions, have the same economic effect as imposing an artificially higher cost on the employer. If the cost of employing a worker is raised
through a wage floor or mandated benefits,
the employer has a simple economic choice: absorb the cost and lose competitiveness, or reduce the quantity of labor demanded.
They hire fewer people.
They hire fewer people, especially those whose productivity falls furthest short of that mandated cost. Who suffers most? The young, the inexperienced, the marginalized, and the less skilled. If a worker can only produce $8 worth of value per hour and the law mandates a $15 wage, that worker is now a losing proposition for the company. They won't be hired.
So what then is the true sustainable path to higher wages, especially in developing economies?
The path is increasing productivity and human capital. The evidence is clear. When multinational corporations start competing for increasingly experienced labor in countries like China and India, They're bidding up the price for workers with rising human capital.
So wages go up naturally.
We've seen wages in those regions going up 10 to 20% annually, not due to government decree, but because the workers' productivity is growing as they gain experience, technical skills, and access to better equipment. Sustainable wage growth is a byproduct of increasing the value a worker creates.
Finally, let's turn to international trade. How can trade possibly benefit both a highly efficient country and a less efficient one simultaneously, even if the efficient country makes everything better?
This is one of the most crucial and counterintuitive insights in all of economics. It's the principle of comparative advantage. You have to distinguish between absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Let's say the United States is absolutely more efficient at producing both computers and clothing than Vietnam. The U.S. can make a better computer and better clothing faster and cheaper. But resources are still scarce within the U.S.
Right. They still have to make trade-off.
Exactly. If the U.S. is vastly better at making computers, but only moderately better at making clothing, it must determine its specialization based on its opportunity cost.
Walk us through that opportunity cost calculation.
Okay, let's use some illustrative numbers. To produce one additional computer, the U.S. might have to give up the resources needed to make 100 shirts. That's its opportunity cost.
Got it.
Vietnam, being less efficient overall, might have to give up the resources needed to make 500 shirts to produce one computer.
So the U.S. should specialize in computers.
Yes, because it sacrifices only 100 shirts, whereas Vietnam sacrifices 500. Vietnam should specialize in shirts because its opportunity cost for making shirts is lower than the U.S.'s.
And when both countries do that,
When both countries specialize based on this lower opportunity cost, the total global output of both computers and shirts increases dramatically, without a single worker in either country becoming technically more productive. Trade allows the world to operate on the highest productivity frontier.
we often hear a related fear that international trade means wealth is flowing out of the country, especially if foreigners are investing heavily here, making the U.S. a debtor nation. Is that a financial danger?
That is a classic accounting confusion that fuels a lot of unnecessary political anxiety. The United States has been a massive debtor nation for most of its history, dating back to the 19th century, yet it has consistently maintained the highest standard of living in the world.
So why isn't it a problem?
Because foreign investment doesn't subtract wealth, it creates it. When foreign investors put billions of dollars into the U.S., they are building new factories, starting new businesses, financing infrastructure,
Creating jobs.
creating new jobs and new goods that did not exist before. This capital inflow creates new domestic assets and wealth that benefits American workers and consumers. The accounting convention calls the inflow a debt because investors are owed a return, but economically, the nation is acquiring physical capital factories, machinery, technology that boosts productivity.
That brings this intensive analysis to a close. If you can identify scarcity, recognize trade-offs, interpret price signals, and understand how productivity drives wages, you gain a massive long-term advantage in your financial strategy.
What's fascinating here is that the systemic consequences of politically driven decisions often take a very long time, often longer than a single political cycle, to fully materialize.
Right.
This time lag obscures the causality.
Right.
Rent control might take 10 to 15 years to visibly destroy the housing stock. Your ability to think economically with a long time horizon that extends beyond the next election cycle is the only real insurance policy you have against the short time horizons of politics, which constantly tries to find solutions where there are only inescapable trade-offs.
If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to subscribe our YouTube channel, social media accounts, and visit fatterdwallets.com for more content, free courses, resources, and tools to help you live wisely and build wealth with purpose.